All right, slide 25. I might be off by a slide. My numbers aren't perfect. It's hard to go back and forth, but the name of this slide is your belief vane functioning? So I'm playing off weather vane and your belief process, because your belief forming process is your mind's reality detector or your reality tracker, your truth tracker, so to speak, right? So in this analogy between the mind, whose primary conscious purpose is to form beliefs that track reality, and the analogy with the weather vane, what's analogous on the belief side to the wind? The wind moves the weather vane. What moves the belief vane or the reality detector? Think about that for a moment. You might want to pause this. Assuming you paused it, I'm coming back now, I'm back. Information and evidence coming in from your senses and from other minds that are also sensing information and sharing it, because human beings are social animals, so we get a lot of information from each other, right? Information, data, perceptual evidence, right? So when a weather vane is rusted or frozen, it's not working. In the analogy, what is rusted or frozen belief like? It means you're not getting evidence anymore. You're insensitive to new evidence. You're impervious to it. You're blocked off from it. Or it's like a weather vane with a dome over it, so that the wind can't touch the weather vane. It touches the glass, right? It's an invisible block to the wind. Similarly, a closed-off mind, it's as if it has a kind of shield that protects it from evidence that might alter its beliefs. If that's happening to you, you're not syncing with reality anymore. Like an old GPS system after the roads have been changed. You have an old map. You're going to get lost. You might drive off a cliff or off a bridge that doesn't exist anymore. So how might you oil, like you can oil a weather vane, loosen it up, get it to move again. How might you oil a dogmatic mind, a mind that's frozen or rusted or not syncing anymore? Pause and think about that for a moment. Okay, are you back? By seeking out information, by challenging your views, by engaging with debates with people who have opposing views and beliefs and values. If all you ever hear are people who think exactly like you, then you're in a little bubble, an echo chamber, as we call it. You're not challenging your mind to test data and information and reasoning about it. You're closed-minded. You know, in our culture, it's become kind of almost like a virtue or a sign of strength when somebody is dogmatic, when they say something like, "That's what I believe, and nobody can convince me otherwise. I don't care what you have to say," right? That's kind of like saying, I don't care what new evidence or logic or reasoning or science ever comes in, I'm going to stick with this view and I'm not going to look at that stuff because I have a dome over my belief forming process which doesn't work anymore. I'm sealed off from syncing with reality and I'm just fixated on this old view and I don't care about reality. When somebody says that, they don't realize that they're bragging about the fact that their minds are not working anymore. Their belief forming process is malfunctioning, and they're bragging about it. The dogmatic person is really bragging about how foolish they are. But they're not wise enough to even realize it. It's like bragging about the fact that I have old maps that I still use. And I don't care if I drive off a cliff. Now that's something worth thinking about. So how do you know if your weather vane is working? If your truth tracker is really working? If your belief forming process is syncing with reality? So I've got it on the slide there, that if it is, then those things in the bullets indented will be true of you. So in philosophy and in logic, just like in math, we'll use a letter to represent like a symbol that's a variable. So in math, x and y are used, 2 plus x equals 5. So x stands for some, whatever. If you fill in x, then if 2 plus x equals 5, then x has that value. And in the case of 2 plus x equals 5, the value of x is 3, right? So x is a variable. And x plus x equals 2x. It doesn't matter what the number is. So that x plus x equals 2x, or x squared equals x times x, right? Those things hold true for any values of x, right? So in logic, we'll use the letter P. We start with P and then Q and then R, just like X, Y, and Z in math, to stand for any kind of claim or statement or proposition, right? Like the cat is on the mat. Today is Tuesday. 2 plus 2 is 4. Blue is a color. Circles are round, right? Those are all propositions, and the word proposition begins with a P. So we start with P. It's just a convention that philosophers use, right? So we'll use the letter P to stand for any statement or claim or thing, a sentence that can be true or false, right? Like today is Wednesday. So in the first bullet, it says, if P is true, you believe P, right? So if that statement, that if-then statement applies to you, right? Like if P is true, whatever the statement is, then you're likely to believe P. That's a good sign that your belief vein is working. And the next bullet says, if P is false, you don't believe P, right? So like if we present you with statements that are true or false, if you're likely to believe the true ones and you're likely to not believe the false ones, right, then your mind is working, at least to that extent, right? And then the next two are more about the evidence that you have, right? And these are more, I guess, close to the reality of it. So in the first bullet, but it's really bullet number 3, but the first of the last 2 bullets says, if the best evidence implies that P is true, then you're likely to believe P, right? So if the best evidence that's presented to you suggests that proposition P, whatever P is true, then you're likely to believe P. That's a good sign that your belief-forming processes are working. And then the last bullet says, if the best evidence implies that P is false, then you're likely not to believe P, right? So if those 4 statements, if P is true, you believe P. If P is false, you don't believe P. If the best evidence implies that P is true, then you believe P. If the best evidence implies that P is false, then you don't believe P. If those 4 statements or other statements like them that have to do with probabilities and amounts, if it's more likely to be true, then you're more likely to believe it and so on, but you get the general idea. If those kinds of if-then statements are true of the way that your mind works, then your mind seems to be working properly as a truth tracker or a reality detector, right? So you should think about that yourself as we go on, because later in the semester, when we start to entertain beliefs that you find meaningful to you, that you're believing them, you have some kind of group commitment to it because members of your group believe it, or your tradition, or your family, or your culture, or your religion, or your club, or whatever it is, right? When you reason about those beliefs, if the best evidence suggests that one of the beliefs that you have is false, but you still believe it, that doesn't reflect well on your epistemology, your weather vane, your belief-forming process, your rationality, your map-making mind. Your mirror is not mirroring reality, right? So keep that in mind, because most philosophy students have problems the deeper they go into philosophical analysis of the things that have formed in their minds as beliefs, when they realize that, as my karate teacher said, that kind of makes sense if you don't really think about it. But if you really think about it, then it doesn't really seem to make sense. But if you keep believing it, even though it doesn't make sense, that's a problematic reflection on whether or not your noodle is working, your philosophical reality detector. All right, so are you willing to really take a look inside the mirror and find out whether or not it's working? Is my mind syncing with reality? I mean, this is a deep and personal question. It's not just an academic exercise. Am I in touch with reality, or am I deluding myself because of some kind of commitments that I have to beings who kind of implanted thoughts in my head before I could think for myself, now that I'm a philosophical adult? That's what this class is hopefully designed to get you to do, is to become a philosophical adult, to think for yourself and figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. All right, so now I want to say something else before we go and end this discussion. This way of thinking applies to arguments and theories and everything, not just beliefs that you have, but anybody else's beliefs, theories, points of view, worldviews, arguments. Then when philosophers use the word argument, we're talking about really an interesting relationship between beliefs. So when you have a conclusion, something you've concluded based on your experience and your evidence and your reasoning, you come to a conclusion that this is the way the world is. This is something true. That's your conclusion. You've inferred that from your experiences with data and information and reality, right? Those two things together, we call that an argument. So whatever statements you put your evidence and your data into the form of a statement, we call that a premise if that statement supports your conclusion, right? So your conclusion is what you believe, like God exists, excuse me, and your premises are why you believe it, right? So I believe that God exists, let's just say, because I read it in the Bible, or it says so in the Bible. My preacher said so. My parents said so. Oh, I had all kinds of experiences when I was reading the Bible. I had weird dreams and this and that. And those are my reasons for believing it, right? All my ancestors have believed it. They act like it's true in church, whatever all the reasons are, right? Those are your premises, right? Those are the reasons why you believe something, are your premises. And the thing that you believe is what you believe is your conclusion. Based on those premises, I conclude this, that God exists, right? So what I believe, together with why I believe it, my conclusion, together with my premises, those two things together, we call that an argument in philosophy. What's your argument? Oh, my argument is I think God exists because I read it in the Bible, blah, 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 blah. Here's my reasons and my premises, my evidence for my conclusion. Or this is the data for my theory, right? Data plus theory, or premises and conclusion together, is an argument. So now, the weather vane analogy doesn't just apply to your own mind. It applies to an argument. An argument is a weather vane question. Do those premises or those reasons why so-and-so or anyone believes that conclusion, are they good enough reasons for concluding that? Do those premises support those conclusions? Are those good reasons why someone should believe that? Is that weather vane working? An argument is like a weather vane, right? It's saying like wind is coming in this way and it's blowing the weather vane that way. These are the reasons and evidence and data, and I conclude this. So is that relationship, are those reasons good reasons for believing that? And are those reasons true, right? Is this argument, this weather vane working, right? So the weather vane analogy also applies to arguments. And arguments are one of the most important, they're like equations in mathematics. That's what arguments are in philosophy. This is what someone believes. This is why they believe it. This is the theory being proposed. This is the data in support of that theory. Does that work? Right? Is this equation correct? If the equation is correct, then this equals that, and vice versa. Same thing with arguments. If the argument is correct, then these premises lead logically to this conclusion. This data, this evidence leads logically to this theory. This theory is the best explanation for this data. They are equal. Otherwise, they are unequal, and this equation fails. This is not equal to that. That's what an argument is. And the weathervane model applies to arguments, not just to your own personal, I believe this because of that. But that's an argument too. I believe in God because I had this experience, or because it says so in the Bible. That's my equation. All right? So weathervanes, do they work? Do the premises and the conclusion, is this argument tracking the truth and capturing reality and reflecting it properly? This is one of the most primary questions in philosophy, right? Is this a good argument? For it to be a good argument, the premises have to be true, it has to be good data, and the conclusion has to follow logically from the premises, right? The data could be true and good data, but it doesn't imply that conclusion. So it's not good logic, right? Or it could be good logic. If that data was true, then this would be the conclusion, but the data is not true. It's not good data, right? So it needs to be both. You need to have good data and good logic to have a good argument. And philosophy is almost all about analyzing arguments and asking, are the premises plausible, reliable? Do we have good evidence that they're true? And do they lead logically to the conclusion? And this applies to all of your beliefs and everyone else's about every single subject that any human being has ever known anything about. In all of the sciences, the arts, the humanities, in everything. Why should I believe that? What do you believe and why? And are those good reasons? And are those reasons true? All right. I think we have a lot to think about. Welcome to the world of philosophy.